psychology, and human services and social work. We've got some questions that we're going to pose to our panel members to kind of get the juices flowing, but we also will have a QR code. That's what we should put up.
Yeah.
And that way you can add your questions in that we can kind of get to after we get to the end of our formal remarks. We'll have each of our panel members introduce themselves. You've also got their bio information. In addition to the folks on the bio page, we have with us today Laurel Cartwright, who is the student services specialist in the social work department. She actually has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in social work. So she's kind of got a dynamic on a couple sides of the coin here. We've also got Brenda Cruz, who is a current psychology major who's been admitted to our MSW program for the fall. And we may have some other students joining us as well to offer you some student perspectives and some connections. After we wrap up today, we're going to follow up with you with some resources and some maybe next steps that you might take to continue your exploration. But with that, I think what we'll do is have our panel members kind of get started. Dr. Sarah Long from the College of Ed is going to facilitate. So I will give her the floor and we'll just get our questions started so we can quickly get to your own questions. Thanks so much for being here.
So before we get started, I just want to have a conversation real quick around, I think we're going to talk a little bit about our specific journeys and how you all got to where you are, and just kind of sharing that, like, normalize the process. That's what this whole panel is about. It's okay to not have it all figured out. These all professions can seem a little similar, so kind of providing a little bit of distinction and little maybe some clarity for you. Hopefully not raise any more questions, but sometimes it does, which is not a bad thing too. So. Again, my name is Sarah Long. I serve as the Assistant Dean and Director of Student Affairs in the College of Education, and I will be moderating the questions for today. So, so the first question that we have for our panelists is just your name, the department / area of specialization, and maybe your career story and work experience that you've had outside of higher ed. You want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. My name is Rachel Weisskittel. I'm in the psychology department. I'm a geropsychologist and licensed clinical psychologist, as well as being in academia. And then a little bit about my career journey. I was in a full-time research position before this position as a professor. I'm a tenure-track professor. I'm in my 3rd academic year here. And before that, I was doing some clinical postdoc things too. So balance of research and working with patients initially.
I'm Marcus Motor-Chandler, coordinator for the Human Services Program in the Department of Counseling and Human Services and College of Ed. I work across all 4 of our degree programs. So I also spend most of my time in our Counseling and Leadership Master's program and our Master's in Counseling and Human Services. And most of my work is with the United States Air Force Academy in their Air Officer Commanding cohort and our Academy Military Trainer program, where they get a combination of counseling and leadership programming. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I've only been in higher ed for a bit. I was a school counselor, private practice counselor for a long time, worked internationally in several countries as a counselor, and then came back to the US and I was a high school principal, director of career and technical education, and now I'm here. And so I've definitely taken the nonlinear route to being in front of you.
And I'm Isla DeBose, and yeah, I don't have a linear route either. So I am with the social work department here at UCCS in the College of Public Service, and currently serving as, I was hearing myself, sorry. This will be ending 8 years, but I've only been at UCCS ending 3 years. So coming to the end of my 3rd year. So my undergraduate degree is in journalism. And I graduated and felt like I was supposed to be an adult and get a job that required a degree. I had worked for Sears in their as retail store in the mall throughout high school, throughout college, whenever I came home on break, so on and so forth. So Sears had, at that point, Sears was my longest holding job. But I thought I graduated now and I need to look for a job that required a degree. I was doing some journalism work, writing for a small publication in the city that I lived in. And my brother-in-law worked in a behavioral health program and said, we're looking for case managers. Okay, now, didn't know what a case manager was. Didn't know what social work was. Didn't know anything about any of it, right? It's my degree is in journalism. But I babysat before and I thought, hey, I could be a case manager because I babysat. And no, it was not babysitting. The program that I started my career in behavioral health, that was a program in New Jersey, which was considered level 4. And what that meant was they were all connected to the criminal justice system in some way. They were teens, but teens in 9 to 21.
Yes.
Connected
Yeah,
to the criminal
probably.
justice
I mean-
system in some way. And if they weren't successful in this
That was
program,
before I
then they
left,
went to
so-
join.
Oh, this one.
So it was a tough crowd, needless to say, but I learned a bunch from this tough crowd of women. And the other folks that worked there. And then that's when I learned about a social worker, because that was who was overseeing the clinical piece of their treatment at this group home. And I thought, oh, well, this is way cool. And then so subsequently worked in several other group homes, worked in it just went out of my head. It was for homeless services, and worked in that a transitional housing program there, worked in school social work. This is all bachelor's level, right? None of this is my master's work. This is all at the bachelor's level. So I spent 11 years as a bachelor's level practitioner, and loved every single moment of it and learned so much. And it really then drove me to get my master's in social work. And so I then got my master's in social work, where I interned doing macro work in a community building in a low-income housing area and empowering them to advocate for themselves. And then a second portion, the second year of my internship, I did at the then I was in South Carolina, but the South Carolina State Hospital, because one of the things that I wanted to know was what happens when all of what I'm learning doesn't work, or it doesn't seem to work. What happens to people, right? So that's what I'm gonna be a state hospital. And let's see, so been in private practice. I have worked in community mental health, serving 5 to 90-year-old, just an array at the master's level of providing services, doing community work, being on boards of being on boards for different agencies, working in homeless services. So number of things that I've done, landing me into academia when, again, someone says, hey, we have a job. And I'm like, okay. And I applied to be practicum director at the University of Arkansas in Fort Smith, and I got hired. I'm saying that everybody gets that lucky, but each of my steps have just been this, hey, this thing is happening. I'm like, okay, let me try it. And I jumped in there. But fortunately, I had the skills and the abilities to do what was being asked of those jobs. And so, and now I decided, after empty nesting, to move to Colorado, and I came here to UCCS in 2021. And so here I am living on this life.
Maybe like.
You actually answered like the next question, which I said, you know, which I want you to elaborate on, but like, I love it so much. So the next question that we have is, what was your major in college and why did you choose it? You can start with maybe Rachel.
Sure. Well, I was a major of psychology in college, and I had a minor in studio art. I originally wanted to be an art therapist, and that's where I thought my path was going to lead me. So, yeah.
I was psychology as an undergrad, and I chose it because I went down a list of majors, crossed out the ones I didn't want to do. And then do very little about psychology.
I love that.
And so ultimately journalism, but I started out as an English major, and the university I was with somehow pushed me into the direction of education, which wasn't really my goal. But I thought, teachers get off in the summer. That could be cool. Right? Again, right? This is like my whole life. thinking things would be cool. And so I did, I was about 19 and I did my field experience with high schoolers and thought this is the worst job ever and I never want to get up every morning and do this. And so I changed my major to journalism because I enjoyed writing. And so I switched for that reason. Now, I will say, had my internship or my field experience happened when I was maybe 21 and not so close to the age of the people that I was working with in that position, my outcome might have been different and I may have stayed with education, but we were peers and I didn't have the insight or the life experiences to really be a teacher at 19 trying to teach a 17-year-old, right? That just didn't make sense for me, so.
Thank you so much. And I want to do like a total bragging moment for the psychology department. So I was a psychology major in college, and a theater minor, just saying, wigs and makeup, not like acting. I loved, I did adopt a grandparent. I did all of these things and I thought that I wanted to do geropsychology from like day one. I was like, geropsychology, yes. And full circle, you know, I ended up getting my whole education in higher ed and that type of thing. But then I ended up working at a university that has a very, very famous, world-renowned geropsychology program. So it's just really cool, like that didn't work out that way, but like I ended up at a place that did that, but not in that field at all. But interactive, we're gonna go a little interactive with this. What is everybody's major here? Since we have kind of an intimate group. Can we share it? If folks feel comfortable? Psychology major? Nice, okay.
I just switched to psychology from business.
Criminal justice.
Psychology.
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 I'm a criminal justice and psychology major.
Wow, okay, a lot of psych and criminal justice, love it. Anybody online? Is there any folks online?
Yes.
Anyone want to share what their majors are?
Can you say that again? Abigail? Oh. Think
If not, they could put it
yeah.
in the chat.
Yeah, you
Alright.
can put it in the chat.
It's wonderful to get to know what your majors are too, because I think that we all, you know, everybody in this room started off, you know, as an undergraduate student in a very specific field that I'm sure you thought that that was where you wanted to go. And then it changed a little bit. And then you found your current role and, you know, I am making the fabulous assumption that you love it. So what do you find the most rewarding about your current role and field?
The thing I find most rewarding about my current field is being able to give or amplify voices that have been traditionally overlooked or underrepresented. So older adults have become more of a focus of our cultural conversation, especially since COVID, but most of the time we prefer not thinking about older age because it makes us feel uncomfortable and we prefer not to think that it ever will apply to us. But hopefully it will apply to us, right? Because the alternative is actually no bueno. And so I think that being able to put a spotlight on these things feels personally fulfilling, personally meaningful. And then in my current role, what is my most meaningful or my favorite part of the job is the student interactions and seeing things click for them. And as someone who didn't know that they would be in a research position as an adult, that was a surprise to me in my journey. It's really cool to see that happen in other students too. As someone who identified as like an art nerd for a long time, I never thought I would be a scientist. That was not my self-conceptualization for sure. And so I really like working with students who are in a perhaps similar place, right? Like they don't perceive themselves to be particularly good at hard science or things like that. And to show them that it's really, you know, you can use fancy words to make it more complicated, but really it's teachable and actually fun sometimes. That is my favorite part of my job.
I think the thing that excites me most about my field is I've worked with the military families, active duty folks for a long time. And we have a lot of folks like that in our program. Our department had 2 degrees dedicated just to that. But I love that coming out of the pandemic, we've kind of seen the need for clinical mental health. And the taboo has kind of been removed from that, seeing that it's something a lot of folks experience, and especially with the military folks, that these are things that are relevant and necessary, and not only impact their careers and ability to work with others, but also the positive outcomes they see in their personal lives and their families. And what I really like about my current role is I feel like a force multiplier in that bringing together counseling theory with leadership, because the research tells us the most effective leaders are people that have high emotional intelligence, are strong interpersonal communicators, but those are typically people who aren't identified for leadership. So how do you bring those things together for organizational effectiveness and outcomes, both for operational readiness and for folks going out in the community, just helping families and individuals? How do we bring those things together? And I love working with our undergrads and our grads, because inevitably, even if you don't want to be a leader, you're going to age into leadership anyway in your organizations. So even if you don't aspire to that, eventually you're going to find yourself leading, managing, supervising folks. And so bringing those skills together, I think is super cool.
I think the love of the profession has to do with the human interaction and the relationships that become and that we develop in those interactions. And so that's probably why I love what I do the most. I think I've spent 20 some odd years getting to know a diverse group of people on their terms, right? Not, you got to do what I say. Okay, sometimes I spit out, maybe a bit, but we can work it and we can understand it. And so those relationships have been very valuable to me, and I would assume valuable to those that I've interacted with, because I have little memorabilia that they kind of given me over the years, and I keep all of that, pack rat, but I hold on to those things because if you felt special enough to give me something at the end of your treatment, then that meant that relationship was very special to you as well. And so I want to honor that. And I think in terms of what I do here with the university, and also just in the profession as well, is the diversity of even the profession. And so I can teach, I can counsel, I can do case management, I can do leadership. I can do all of these different things with the skills that I've learned within the profession. And so it feels really good to pass that on. And also recognizing kind of legacy in some ways. It's that I won't be here forever, but the need will be here. And so being able to pass on my legacy to somebody else, to serve our community, to serve our people, to serve human beings and be nice human beings to other people is a great thing.
Love that. The common theme that I'm hearing is just the love of human interaction and people. And that's truly incredible. And I think that that's why you end up choosing psychology and or criminal justice. You're like, I just want to help people, which kind of brings you to this panel, right? But it also can be a little challenging, right? So can you talk about some of the things you find to be most challenging in your role or field?
The thing I find most challenging in my role is the fragmentation of the role. So in my job, it's what's called like a 40-40-20 split, which on paper means that 40% of your time should be dedicated to research, 40% should be dedicated to teaching, and 20% should be dedicated to service. Service means sitting on committees and basically helping the department function. All the things behind the scenes that makes everything run smoothly. So within those segments of my job, I wear 7 different hats each, right? Like I'm teaching multiple classes at one time. I also clinically supervise students. So they work under my license as they are on practicum. And so we meet for supervision. That's all lumped under teaching. Also reviewing all of their notes and teaching them how to write and stuff. So that's all teaching, which is 40%. The other 40% is running a research lab, right? The research aspect of it. And I have a lot of different projects, a lot of different people I've hired to work on these different projects. So that's another part. And then the service, being on many different committees and just being helpful and organized in that way. So the hardest part is sometimes triaging what my week is going to look like because it requires prioritization. And sometimes everything feels equally important. And on the bad weeks, everything also feels equally urgent. So it's really hard sometimes to fit all of the things I'm supposed to be at the same time and knowing how to prioritize those things. And a lot of it, which someone as neurotic as I am, I love planning and like or filing and color coding and things. And a lot of this job you only can learn about while you're in it. You cannot read about it and then be more prepared. Like a lot of it, you have to just experience and embrace the chaos of it. So that's been a personal growth part for me in adjusting to this role is basically the time management of it. Because the other thing I'll say is that I enjoy all of these tasks. I enjoy all the different hats I wear. So how do you feel really satisfied with yourself at the end of the day, right? It's like similar to being a student again, because you're like, oh, I always could be working more. I always could be reading more or doing something else. And so how do you get to a point where you're able to close that and shift to the other priorities of your life? So that might bring a little bit true for some of you, maybe be a miss for others, but that's my honest answer about that.
It's very similar. In my department in counseling, we all still have active practice. And so we all see clients out in the community. So I have a counseling practice and I have a coaching practice. Those are actually very different things. On top of like responsibilities here. And our fields are emotionally laborious and sometimes moving between one unrelated task to another is challenging, especially if we have like a really tough session with a client and then I'm in class like 20 minutes later. And we're talking about career development theory. Those do not overlap. And so needing that kind of a cognitive and emotional dexterity to move between those things. I think at this point we're all well practiced in that, but that doesn't make it any easier on one of those tough days. Bringing something from a client into an unrelated scenario or vice versa. So just kind of moving between those things. And even when you have similar clients, one client can be talking to you about the greatest thing going on in their life, and the next client's telling you about the hardest thing going on in their life. And you move between those two things, but then like 2 hours. And so that can be challenging at times. And sometimes even with practice, we take those things home. And so the challenge is not taking it home too much and engaging in what we all preach, but sometimes don't practice. It's self-care. That's that buzzword. And so often it's do as I say, not as I do when we're in our roles. So being really mindful about engaging in that so I can show up best for a client and my students the next day.
Yeah, and I think I would second everything that they've said in terms of frustration. And one thing that I would add is policy. Policy is probably one of my biggest frustrations because you see the needs of a client. And then whether it be insurance, it be policies of agency, it be policies of whatever coming down, and what we in social work call that macro piece, dictating what you're allowed to do on the micro level, that one-on-one level. And so that's very frustrating for me as policy because it sometimes gets in the way of doing your best work with the client. And so, yeah, that's very frustrating.
I would second policy.
I think those are such authentic answers. And I think that, and I hate to say this, sometimes it gets a little bit even more complicated, and I'm sure you all have incredibly complicated lives. So unfortunately, the bad news is that it doesn't get less complicated. But the thing is I one of my graduate students tell me, I just want like that work-life balance and that type of thing. And I just don't want to think about my work and my job all the time. And my response to her was, when you find that career that you love, you end up thinking about it all the time, but you love it. So it's like trying to shut off something that you're like, but what about? But what if we did? Oh, but I got to fix this. And so I think it is really hard. And so that balance and all of those things.
I'm going to add to that. So I recently found this show on Netflix called Love on the Spectrum. Any of you familiar with it? Okay, so I'm a little late to the show. But I binge watched it, so I was seeing the entire 2 episodes, right? And my husband looks at me and goes, social work in you. I'm like, it probably is. I just left it. But that just what you're saying, that you start to find the career in spaces that you might consider sacred, like going to a movie, but now you're being the social worker, psychology, or human service worker in that space as well. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's okay to have integrated that into your life, because I think part of choosing these careers is because there was something about our personalities that lined up with the work, and that's how we ended up there. But also finding that balance, like you said, of this can't be a stressful integration of that career.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, what did you do to try on your field? So how did you know that this was the thing that you wanted to do by trying it on?
The way I tried it on happened at first in undergrad. I had wanted to be a resident advisor because I thought that that would set me up for success in having some counseling experience. And I did not get that job. And I didn't really know what to do with myself because also it paid for a lot of college, right? Like free room and board, free meal plan, things like that. And so suddenly I needed to find a job that would now help me, with those things financially. And so there was a notice. I interviewed for waitressing and like hostessing jobs, didn't get any of those. But I did see an email advertisement for a research assistantship at the hospital in palliative care, which is kind of close to end of life, things like that. And that's where I knew I wanted to work anyways. And so I applied for that job and interviewed for it, not driven by the research aspect so much, but by the patient population that it would connect me with. And that's how I stumbled into research because I got that job and I ended up being really good at it. And I was like, what? I just didn't, and I worked my way up and I ended up, I had a great mentor, which is one of the reasons I was lucky enough to be able to put my feelers out even more into this thing that I had stumbled, is that my mentor really was uplifting in my career development and showing me what I was capable of. I think it probably helped that I truly didn't believe like this was for me at the beginning. And so she taught me how to apply for grants and what that means and what makes scientific writing different than the other writing that I had done. And really brought me up. And she even is the one, well, in that team, in that palliative care team, because interdisciplinary. So I got like a lot of exposure to working with lots of different backgrounds and doing health research with lots of different professionals. And that's always what I've really liked to do. And so that whole team actually was the one who kind of encouraged me to go the PhD route, because even despite working there for 3 years, I still was set on applying for an art therapy master's program. But still, and they were like, we feel like you could contribute more to the field of art therapy if you wrote about it and did studies on it about, and actually that's exactly what I've done since then. But again, I would not have done that without them explicitly telling me that that is something that I should consider. And so I really credit that kind of shaped path to people who helped me see who I could possibly be.
A good mentor.
Oh, we
great.
still keep in touch and she's amazing.
Very, very similar actually in regard to mentorship, right, which I think is kind of an important message for you all to hear is find, if you don't have somebody, find somebody, because we love doing that stuff. And there are people in your departments that love doing that stuff. I was a psych major and I was specializing in neuroscience, like psychology, that type of psychology, with the intent of going to psychiatry. And I had to do a cadaver lab, so like a whole body in front of me. And we took the brain out and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. But then we had to start like digging around in the torso and I was like, nope. And in learning more about psychiatry, you have to do medical rotations. You actually have to do like surgery. And I was like, I don't want to do any of that. I'm not squeamish, but I don't want to make, I didn't want to go through a doctoral program digging around through people's insights. And so one of the professors I really liked, Dr. Carla Gingrich, who since retired, incredibly impressive woman. She was a forensic psychologist and a counseling psychologist. And so she was one of the primary folks who would go down to the Supermax, the federal penitentiary, and do interviews with like some of the highest level diagnoses that exist, people who are serving like consecutive life sentences. And her stories were just fascinating. And I was like, but I don't want to do that. But she talked more about her experience in private practice doing counseling psychology with families and children. So I found an undergraduate research assistant position in the Human Development and Family Studies department. And I'm doing research with 0 to 5-year-olds, with faculty, and looking at the family system, family dynamics, and kids. I found that really interesting. So I'm not licensed marriage and family therapy, But that's what got me into thinking more about kind of the counseling side, systems theories, and working like actually with the clients in small group settings and families. And that informed my decision to go into counseling and not a master's in psychology. But I love the research, but so it sparked my interest in research and kind of that family dynamic, and group dynamics and processes.
So I guess my try-on was that graduating from college and believing I needed a job as an adult and going into a group home and starting to work there because I had babysat before. But ultimately, what led me to a master's program was having worked for that 11 years in different spaces, having worked under social workers as my supervisors. And them just really encouraging me to go on, because I probably could have been a case manager for the rest of my life if it wasn't for the mentorship and the encouragement to say, you know what, you really should go ahead and get your master's degree and do the higher level work because you're really good at insight. Because I think, so I'm dating myself. So my time as a bachelor practitioner was in the 80s or the 90s, early 90s. And so back then, it's always been ethically, you don't operate or work outside of the scope of your practice, right? And so as a bachelor's, I should not be doing therapy, but I am pretty sure in some of these settings that there was some therapy happening, but not really clear. And just fortunately, I worked for agencies that trained us very well to engage our clients. And so from, I guess, them seeing my skills with the clients, I was very much encouraged to go. And it took me 11 years to finally say, okay, I'm gonna do it. But nonetheless, that was probably what the try-on was, that 11 years, and then saying, yeah, you know what, I think I do want to do the master's level work because it is different.
So I feel like you're like the perfect like segue to so many of the next questions, and I love it so much. I love it so much. So the next question is, what options, what are the options for students with a bachelor's degree or master's degree or doctoral degree in your specific field? And is it common for people to have a first degree in, one field and then switch into your field? Should you have the same thing the whole way up? And what decision of major career path is the next decision, but not just the last decision?
I actually
The
think,
big question.
I think it'd be more helpful if you guys went first, and then I'll kind of like scoop up the remnants that apply to psych, because we have so much overlap that I feel like what you guys say will be really helpful as a foundation for them.
So, okay, I'll start. So BSW practitioner is essentially how I describe it to our students is that you can do case management, you can do information and referral, you can do intake assessments, but not clinical assessments, and knowing the difference between those two. So a lot of the work that you do as a BSW or at the bachelor's level is what we call generalist practice. Is that it's almost like being a jack of all trades, master of none, meaning that you learn a lot of different skills that you can use at that level. One of the advantages of getting a bachelor's degree, if you plan on pursuing a master's degree in social work, is that we have what's called advanced standing if you have the bachelor's degree in social work. So where most master's programs that will allow you to go into a counseling profession, you would complete 2 years. If you have a bachelor's in social work, your master's program would be 1 year under the advanced standing. So because I did not have a bachelor's, I did a 2-year program. So if you don't have a bachelor's in social work, then you go in and you do the 2-year master program. If you have a bachelor's degree in social work, you can apply for advanced standing, and then it would be 1 intensive year for your master's degree. So that's one advantage of having a bachelor's over a bachelor's over any other degree going into social work's master's program. But it doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. I think once you become a master's level practitioner, it opens the world up for you a lot more, gives you a lot more freedom and latitude in terms of what you can do. So we have 2 levels of licensing. The first one for Colorado would be an LSW, and that is someone who has a master's degree and they become licensed at what we call the lowest level. Then you do 2 years of work and supervision concurrently, and then you're allowed to sit for the exam to become an LCSW, which is what I am. And most states have those 2 levels of licensing. Here in Colorado, BSWs are not licensed, but in other states they are. So we encourage our students who are VSW students and they are not Colorado residents, that if you're going to another state, check to see what the laws are, what the licensing rules are, because like I came here from Arkansas, you can be licensed as a VSW. And so it may be certain classes that you have to have in those different states when you talk about licensing, but at a master's level to do therapy, you must be licensed. And if you're going to go to another state, you want to know what it is. So for instance, is that my husband was military when I was doing all of this. And so he was stationed at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. And in order for me to get licensed in Kansas from South Carolina and Arkansas, I would have needed to take a class because it was a course that was not in my master's program that they require through Kansas's licensing system. And so I said, we're going to stay in Arkansas. We'll just visit on weekends. No, there were some other reasons for that as well. So just understanding the licensing procedures, I think, become very important, and recognizing that because those are some of the bigger differences. We do have a lot of overlap, but licensing is one of the things where you see some differences in kind of what's the path that's next in terms of bachelor's, master's level, and then even when you look at a PhD level. And so for social work, we have PhD level social workers who are very similar to any other PhD who does a lot of research in the work that they do. But then we also have a practitioner's doctorate. It's called the Doctorate of Social Work, DSW, which is geared more toward practitioners, and that is to improve your leadership or increase your leadership and your clinical skills to remain in practice and not so much to go into academia, whereas a PhD is more likely to go into academia.
For human services at the PA level, it doesn't lead to licensure or credentialing, but we do have at the bachelor's level addiction certification. So in our BA, we have coursework that allows students, even before they graduate, to get their coursework for their initial addictions credential through the state. And so human services students will go into any number of fields, community organizations, nonprofits. We have many students who go and work in substance use and recovery centers, work at our veteran centers, and going into a counseling master's degree, it is not necessary that you have a human services, psychology, social work degree. Our graduate students have backgrounds from, name it. We have folks with business degrees. We have folks with mass communications. We have folks that came from psychology. So it's not a prerequisite, and we don't have any advanced standing. We have a national accrediting body called the CAPE. It's not important you know what that stands for until you decide to go to a master's degree. But in that, we have licensure at the master's level. So you have a certification and licensure at the master's level, which allows you to practice and provide therapy. And that's regulated by the state very similarly to all three of our professions. And so when our students graduate with their master's degree, they can get a license in school counseling or a clinical mental health credential, which leads to what we call LPCC, which is the initial license to practice. And you do 2 years of supervision, very similar after graduation, which leads to your LPC, licensed professional counselor. And then you can practice without supervision. So very similar in that regard. I'm a case in point. I went undergrad psychology, master's in counseling and human services, and I got both of our licenses. I got school counseling and clinical mental health. And then I went and got a second master's in leadership and then a doctorate in leadership. And so our doctorate in the counseling field is counselor education and supervision. And that allows you to teach at the graduate level in our accredited programs. I'm kind of a one-off in that I get to work in all of them because I have different degrees in different fields. But our doctorate is a PhD in counselor education supervision, which is also accredited. And counseling, we generally have pretty good license portability between states because most programs that are accepted in those states for licensure are that K-PREP accreditation. So if you happen to go get a master's in counseling, you want to look for that K-PREP accreditation because once you get that license, then you can really go to most any other state with a license transferability. And occasionally you'll see something where you have to take like an additional course that the state may dictate, but it's not very common.
That overlaps quite a bit with the process of psychology, but I do want to do a quick check-in to see if this is making sense, the difference between license and why we're emphasizing license so much, and not just degrees. Because in the as an undergrad, which most of you are, if not all, you're really focused on what degree am I gonna get and what's my next degree that I'm gonna get, if anything. So is this making, does anyone know what we mean by license? Is that clear? Or like how a license is different than a degree? Okay, I'm seeing like some nods, but
Okay.
a lot of no nods.
Okay.
So could, yeah, maybe, okay, well, this is my first time trying to explain what, so check me if this is making sense. So, but if I were an undergrad, I would have no idea. I would be like, that feels like a far off future Rachel, like adult Rachel needs to worry about license. I have no idea. I'm just trying to figure out what degree I want. So here's my, so a license is something that you have to usually take some kind of test for and to be allowed to have. And it's not given to you by university. It's given to you by the head honchos of your discipline. So like for me, it would be American Psychological Association or APA. And then there's a state licensing board for the state in the United States. In this country, it is more complicated than other countries because of the state aspect. But you take a licensing exam to yay or pass or fail, and many people you can fail, and to be given a license to do what your degree has taught you how to do. So to be able to be allowed to even sit and take the licensing exam, you have to have the degrees that are being described for whatever licensing you are. So, but that's only one criteria. For a lot of licensing exams, not only do you have to have a certain degree, like a master's in counseling, but you also have to have a paper where a mentor has says, yes, I confirm that they have seen 1,500 hours of clients, that they've been a practicing therapist under my supervision. And so those are the degree and the documented practice of actually working with people under a licensed professional. That's what you have to sit for the licensing exam.
Okay, and so in social work, that would be a little different. So with social work, once you receive so if you're in a state that has a bachelor's degree, then, and they have licensing at the bachelor's level, you get the degree, you can take the test.
Mhm.
And now you're at the master's level. You've earned the master's degree, you can take the test. To get to the highest level of licensing, because we've got 2 levels, you have to then get the hours of supervision, have the client contact hours before you can sit for the test. Someone's signing off. I just wanted to kind of put that distinction in at those levels.
Yes.
That's what I'll turn it back to you.
Well, and that's another thing about the different licenses. And so why do we not just use degrees? Well, because license is at the whole state. It doesn't matter what school you went to. We assume that you know certain things because you got a degree, but it's possible that you did a really bad job in that class and you aren't really remembering anything that you learned in ethics, right? So because being in a helping profession is so important, because you're working with people who are vulnerable and looking to you for guidance. When you're in a helping profession, there is extra quality control that you have to go through. In this case, that's how I would describe a licensing exam or licensing board, to make sure that, you as an individual actually understood all of the things that you gleaned from those degrees, and that you have practical experience that demonstrates competence, which in some forms is that written documentation of a mentor saying like, yes, they actually have worked with humans before and I didn't have to fire them.
Oh,
So,
and one thing to add, I don't know how this skipped my brain, because I'm the director of it. So in social work, we have what's called practicum. And you must complete a practicum. So for some disciplines, it may be optional that you do an internship. Social work, it is mandatory. It is part of our educational standards. And so as a bachelor's, you will complete 200 hours each semester of practicum hours or internship hours. If you don't complete those, you don't get the degree until you do. And if you are unsatisfactory or you can't prove proficiency in the 9 competencies that are listed on your learning contract, then you don't get the degree. right? Now, you can always retake the courses, not saying you retake everything. You just retake your practicum courses. But that's kind of that gatekeeping out of college, right? Or those hours out of college to show you that you have that proficiency to sit for that exam. And it's the same thing at the master's level, that you will complete a practicum prior to graduating. And if you don't, again, show proficiency in the practicum hours, then you don't get the degree until you can.
That's the same in human services and counseling, internship, practicum, field work. There's hours requirements. I equate it to like, you don't want to get on a plane with a pilot who read about flying a plane. You want to get on a plane with somebody who's actually like flown a plane before, and has demonstrated they know how to fly a plane. So we have those kind of filters, where, if a student doesn't necessarily demonstrate proficiency, they're not kicked out. We just do some remediation, coaching, guiding, mentoring. Yeah, but I pretty much exact same answers.
Yeah, so not to say that you can skate through the degree portion of these things and then licensing is the only way to catch it. That's not the case, but it is an extra thing that other disciplines perhaps don't have to go through. So like the medical professions also have this, right? Licensing, like your medical license, being a lawyer, you have to pass the bar. It's not just your degree, things like that. So you can compare it to things to that. Okay, so for psychology, there are multiple types of licenses that you can have. You can have a family and marriage counseling license. What I have is I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and so you have to have a PhD. You have to go to a clinical psychology PhD program to have that. And the clinical psychology PhD is it takes a very long time because it's training you how to be an expert clinician and an expert researcher concurrently. So we have the practicums, but you're also learning how to do research and even maybe contribute to studying and creating new therapies, and how would you test if that even works. And so it's like the ethos behind the clinical psychology PhD is that it's important to know both things because they inform each other so strongly. If you are more, I don't know, scholastically, bookishly driven and don't ever want to work with people, you can get like a health psychology PhD, which is not licensable. It just means that you're an expert researcher in that topic. And so those, there are different variations of PhDs in psychology that do not set you up for licensure. They're just like, you love to read and write and run studies on this topic. So there are some PhDs like that, but clinical psychology is not one of them. Clinical psych is clinically oriented in addition to other things. And then you can get mastered. There are like lots of different versions of psych masters. So like there's a sport psych master's program that you go through, and you can get a sport psych license and things like that. So you can kind of look around for different examples of that. Most programs in the master's level within psychology are 2 years. Some of them are what you would call like terminal licensing programs. Some of them are not. Some of them require, like, if you want to be licensed, you have to probably finish a PhD after this. So I think that's my summary of the psych stuff. But as you can see, it overlaps quite a bit in theme with some of the other questions. Yeah.
And just to complicate things, there are also certificates. I won't dive too much into that, but there is a distinction between certificate and licensure. So in our BA in Human Services, you can get a certified addictions counselor credential, which allows you to work at the kind of the entry level. And at the master's level, it's a licensed addictions counselor. And so there are distinctions there. And I have licenses and certificates. Some are certificates you can get once you're licensed as a specialization, and some certificates allow you to practice at an entry level. So there's kind of a broad spectrum there.
Well, I'll complicate things a little bit more, but I'll just by talking about my story. So I have a PhD in clinical psychology with a specialization in behavioral medicine. So what that means is that I knew when accepting, the PhD offer that they gave me, that I would have to, as part of that program, and to successfully graduate the PhD program, I'd have to take at least 5 extra classes that they require in health. Because I always knew I wanted to work in end of life and things like that. So everyone who goes through the program that I was in is trained in both classroom and practicum sites in how to be really informed of medical information, right? So like diabetes management, bedside, like how different psychopharm things, because everyone who graduates from that program ends up working in a hospital, which is what I always thought I was gonna be doing. Or like some kind of health aspect of things. So that is an example of different, your certificate comment reminded me of that. So there are different clinical psychology PhD programs that have a specialization. And so what that means is that it's renowned and focused in the patient population that it's setting you up to work in. So at UCCS, we have 2 of those. We have a geropsychology clinical psych PhD program, of which I'm part of core faculty. And the second one we have is a trauma focused clinical psych PhD. So depending on what track our students are in, they take separate extra classes on top of the classes that they share, which is just the foundational classes of the clinical psych PhD program. So that's not something that you can do retroactively. You have to know what type of specialization program you want to be in when you're applying to them, because they're very specific. There are only 5 geropsych PhD programs in the country, for example, and ours is the first one, which is pretty cool. So that's something that I think a lot of students at the undergrad level do not know. They're like, it is complicated enough even knowing, do I apply for a master's or PhD at this level? What do I do? So that's something that you can look into.
And it's super complicated, which kind of goes back to the earlier thing, like speak to your advisor, speak to your mentors. Like we can help you sort through all those weeds.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in this whole thing, you are not alone. They shared a lot of things which are complicated and also true. Like, so it is a lot. It might be a long journey if this is the field that you want to go into, but I think it's really important that you know kind of what you're getting yourself into before you get into it.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
In all of this and all this complication, or confusion sometimes, I'll tell you, it's all doable.
Yes.
Like it's more doable than it's not doable. These are like 100 steps taken over years, but it all started with that first step, and it's all very doable.
So I love it because that was exactly, so
Oh,
my
yeah.
question is, what advice would you give to students who are pursuing a career in your field? So I love that you interjected with the answer, like that was just perfect. So, but feel free to expand if you want to share more.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know, you shared, so I was just like that, and that's perfect, and I love it. So if you want to share anything else.
You don't have to have all these steps figured out like now sitting in this room or even at the end of the semester, or even next year. Generally, if you have an idea, then the steps will fall into place through mentorship and advising and coursework. And so don't let it be overwhelming if you decide to go this route. Just know that every time you're in class and every meeting you have is like a step in a checkbox towards that ultimate goal. And there are a ton of people to help you. And it can seem overwhelming when you hear all this stuff, but there are people whose offices are open to you and can clarify all of this.
And I would add to that, like really just to strongly reinforce what you just said. I think taking the time, because there's different nuances to each one of them. And so I think taking the time to sit down with each one, make an appointment with each department to really talk and ask questions one-on-one, that's going to be more specific to what you need to know to make that decision.
And even though the options feel like a really complicated decision tree, I remember this process of having a bunch of professionals that I looked up to and was working with give me a lot of opinion about what they thought I should do with my life. And I remember really what was most helpful to me in making an actual decision on that was the simple question of how do I want to be spending my time? And I'm someone who falls very in the middle of the bell curve of extrovert, introvert. And so it's something I knew that would be really important for me is having a job that allowed me to have alone time working on a computer and also have time interacting with humans. And I knew that I needed both because I knew I'd be miserable in a job where I was only in an office working on the computer all the time. Or alternatively, if I was working with people all the time, I'd be so drained all the time. And so that was part of what helped me decide to do the PhD, is because I liked the people clinical aspect of it. And I liked the, ooh, let me look into this data set and like be with myself for 6 hours and not talk to anyone while I like run through all these things. And that's really the job. That's the degree that allowed me to have the lifestyle that I wanted.
And I think one other thing that helped me in my decision, and I don't know, I might be just a little different in this way, is that it was the code of ethics for social work. And it lined up with my own personal ethics and values and morals. And that was another thing that drew me to social work over other disciplines was the code of ethics. So checking out the code of ethics for the different disciplines as well might help give you some insight and understanding what direction works best for you as well.
I chime in, Sarah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we're really hearing is that there's no one right way to get to where you're headed. And a lot of it is about what's the right fit with your skills, your interests, your values, the opportunities that are available to you, what you have access to. And so that's the beauty, but also the challenge, right? Because you're that variable in the middle that is kind of driving where you'll be fulfilled. And I really appreciated what you said, Isla, that thinking about what information do I need to help me better understand this or to better see myself in this might also help you decide who might be the person you want to sit down with first. So for example, if you're trying to understand, is the social work field a growing profession in Washington, DC, that's something that someone from our career center could help you dig into and research because they're experts on the career piece of it. If you're trying to understand what kinds of classes would I need to take, how long will it take me to finish this degree at a bachelor's level, that's where an advisor could come in. If you're trying to understand after graduation, what options might be available professionally, graduate school, in a general sense, that's where your faculty can speak from their experiences. There's lots of different helpers based on what need you need, what information you need, and how we can help you meet that need.
And just to kind of add to that, meeting your need, I don't want you all to think, and particularly if you're talking about at master's level. So we have a master's program, you have a master's program, and we all have master's program, right? And we all love for you to be a part of it. Absolutely would. However, one area of social work is veterinary social work. We don't have it in our master's program. So it would be unfair to me to sell you my program. It'd be unethical actually, to sell you my program, not letting you know there are programs out here in the United States that do veterinary social work. And there are even resources where you can join up and pay in-state tuition, even though they're on the other side of the country. And so the price point isn't as hard as you might think it might be. So that's one of the things too that we can offer you is like just really a very genuine insight to what your interests are and not just selling you our product. Of course, we're going to sell you our product, but alternatives as well based on what your needs are.
Yeah, I think we would all rather have more helpers in the helping professions, regardless of if they come to our program or not.
Right.
I think we've really segued into a wonderful, like the student questions. So I know that we have one up here. So do we want to read this question first, maybe? What do you think is, do you think it is important to go into the field after getting your bachelor's or trying different occupations before jumping into the graduate program?
I'll jump in on this one. So in counseling, in our counseling masters, we have a bunch of traditional students who went bachelor's, masters, as straight out of their undergrad. And we have a lot of like second career folks. And they both bring very unique perspectives and skill sets that benefit each other in their learning experience. And so a lot of second career folks that came from other careers, and that perspective as a counselor is very valuable, I think, because you have a broader lens in which to work with clients one-on-one and families. So I would say yes and both. And yes.
I would agree. I would agree. It really just depends. I have a student who will graduate this May, and I believe she will be 20 or 21. Very young, because, you know, now you can earn college credits when you're in high school. And so she came in with a lot of credits, and so she was very young coming in. And so based on her maturity level, she probably could go into a master's program and do just fine. But if she didn't have the maturity level and some life experiences, my suggestion or recommendation to her might be to wait and sit out a year, get some more experience before going into a master's program. So it really is not it's like you said, yes and no.
And we also have, and I just want to share real quick, we also have some students in the room. I think we have just one student. Do we have another student who has been asked to come here? So also, do you want to introduce yourself and your current major?
I'm Brenda. I am majoring in psychology, and I'll be finished in the summer, and then I start a social work master's in the fall. I'm non-traditional, so this would technically be a career change, which I didn't realize until you said that. I'm a veteran, and so yeah, I've done so many jobs. Customer service, mainly, waitressing and call centers, terrible jobs. But yeah.
So I bring you up because we have people who did it and people who are in it. So like we have kind of the whole spectrum here. If you have any questions around what are you feeling right now versus, you know, what did it take to get there? So again, feel free. I don't know if we have any questions online, but yeah, anybody else have any questions? Yes.
So I'm also an undergrad in psychology, and I'll be starting the counseling in June, so like I'll have like a month in between, but like
That month will go by quick.
Sorry.
That month will go by quick.
Yeah.
Don't blink.
Yeah, so in undergrad, I feel like it's really easy to be involved on campus because there's so many things for us to do, like there's undergrad research assistantship, like a lot of clubs and things like that. So in grad school, are there ways to like be involved on campus? Like, will we even have time to be involved?
Yeah, well, in the social work program, we have graduate assistantships. And so that helps our students to engage with our faculty and on their research projects. There are different things that will come up across campus within the College of Public Service. We have a bunch of stuff that comes up, and I'm sure it's in the other colleges as well. So you just kind of have to stay tuned, right? Or stay attuned rather to what's going on so that you're aware of what your opportunity is going to be. But yes, they will be there for you as a graduate student as well.
You still join clubs too.
Yeah.
And then anything on MLC, Madeline Connect, you can still go to.
Okay.
Yeah, we have, in counseling, we have graduate teaching assistants and graduate research assistants. They're two different positions, but all faculty have one or the other. And pretty much anybody who is interested in it, there's a spot for it. We haven't had to turn many folks away. We prioritize students in our department for those positions. My graduate assistant, I'm publishing a book that comes out in June, and so she's been doing some research on that book and is actually getting a citation, getting a reference for that. And then two of my colleagues contributed a chapter, and their research assistants get credits in that as well. So a lot of work, but also like some teaching responsibilities. So coming into labs, to lab lead is an opportunity in our program, both lab leading the clinical skills lab for undergrads and graduate students is an opportunity. We have I think we all have some variation of an honor society. And so we have elected positions in our honor society, a lot of activities there. And then, yeah, everything else on campus is still available.
Yeah. So just not a follow-up question, but kind of related to the same like topic. You mentioned like practicum, internship, and field work. Like, what's the difference between them?
The names.
The names. It basically means you're out in the world collecting hours, working with people. Field work.
Sometimes for free, like me, you know, I'm saying social work, sometimes for free. Our masters sometimes will get a stipend, but most of them are not paid.
So field work is what we call it at our undergraduate level. Practicum is kind of that first stage where You go out, you shadow a clinician, and you may engage in some work, but you're not doing direct client work necessarily, you're observing. And then internship are 2 semesters where you're actually doing that work yourself under supervision. So we kind of phase you in. So you demonstrate skill, ability, knowledge, go into practicum shadow, and then you get that internship experience. So we kind of gradually release you in practice.
Social work, we actually just changed the name, so it was social work field work. And looking, so in social work, we've done a shift in education of looking more at anti-racist, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we made the decision with our program to take field out because of the connotation and the historical connotation that goes along with field work. And students aren't paid, and we don't want that to be how you're perceived because you aren't paid oftentimes in your internships. And so we switched to practicum. So BSW or MSW, it is all practicum, and you will get your exposure and your experience is kind of based on the pace that you do at whatever setting you're at. So you could be immediately doing some one-on-one stuff based on the training that your practicum site sets you up with, or it might be a shadowing the first semester and more one-on-one and having a caseload the second semester. It just depends on the site and the setting that you're in.
Another thing that might be worth thinking about is not just how do I want to help in the world, but who do I want to help in the world, or what issues are important to me. So we also have with us today Morgan Thompson from the sociology department. She's here with some resources about our gerontology minor. And so if you are interested in helping with an aging population, gerontology as a minor is an interdisciplinary program, meaning it pulls courses from different areas. The sociology, human services, and women and ethnic studies department offer certificates in things like gender and sexuality studies or Native American Indigenous studies. So there's ways to kind of say, oh, I want to help and I want to learn more about this group or this challenge so that I can really focus in it. So you can really kind of be intentional and strategic about how you put those pieces together in a way that might help you be more focused with next steps.
Thank you, and thanks for letting me slip in today for just a few minutes. My name is Morgan Thomas. I'm over with the sociology department, and I also help facilitate the gerontology minor. So I already heard some of these terms up here, and I was really thankful to be able to listen for a little while before hopping up here. But geropsychology is a hugely growing field. So gerontology, if you're not familiar, is the study of late life and old age, right? So geropsychology, and we do need people, right? We need people working in fields that are specifically serving our elders in our society. They tend to be an underserved population. Yeah. So I do have some brochures here if you are interested. Really, the gerontology minor, you can add on to any major, right? Because it's people. Even if someone's in the engineering program, right? We need people to create new innovative technologies, assistive technology for our aging populations, right? So even engineering, chemistry, pharmacology, looking at that, doing research into the differences between a milligram dose for a 20-year-old versus a milligram dose of something for an 80-year-old. It's probably going to be a little bit different. And in fact, it is. So, which shows up in the research, right? So it is 18 credit hours. There's 4 requirements. One of them is a placement so that you get to work directly with an agency here in Colorado Springs that specifically offers up services and information to our elder populations here in the Springs. So you get some of that hands-on experience out there working in that capacity. It's 120 hours for that placement. And that can be split up across semesters. So you don't have to do it all in one semester, just so you know. 120 hours, right? Yes, and then there's 3 other requirements. The psychology of aging is in there, so you get the geropsychology component. And then you get a class called Transitions in Adulthood, where we look at kind of that's sort of like neglected in between that all of you are in right now. That we're like, doing all the things. And then intro to gerontology as well. And I teach those two, transitions and intro to gero. And then you get a choice of 6 credits from a nice list. I've spent some time here compiling a new list. It very cross-disciplinary: anthropology, communications, even geography, population geography matters. We've got health sciences in here, biomedical ethics. I know y'all talk about ethics and things like that. So you have a nice list of choices for your last 2 classes that you can take to apply. So yeah, thanks again for letting me just kind of plant some seeds in our students'
Good
minds.
question.
Yeah.
And so for the certificate, if a student has a requirement of 120 hours, can they be done concurrently with another requirement from another area that they're in? So if they are BSW and they're doing their practicum hours, can those hours concurrently count toward?
That's a great question. I think so. Since I took over, well, we didn't have a director until I stepped in. So I'm still learning along the way and making revisions and making changes, and really am interested in working across departments and across disciplines. So yeah, that absolutely something that we can consider, because it is a commitment. It's a time commitment, right? Lots of emotional labor and physical labor involved with all of that, cognitive labor involved with all of that. So if we can support that process for students so they don't burn out, and start to feel really overwhelmed, absolutely. I'd totally be open to that. Awesome conversation. Yeah, for sure.
On the back table, just to kind of piggyback on what Morgan has shared, we have advising guides for the bachelor's programs, for psychology, social work, and human services for both this year and the catalog starting next year. We've also got the human services minor, the gerontology minor, and then we have a student affairs and higher education minor. So as we get ready to wrap up, I know we still have plenty of time for questions. Just wanted to let you know that you could help yourself to those. And we'll also send you an email with some follow-up things where you can go and kind of pick out the resources you want to dig into more directly.
Yeah, I'll leave these back over here. Feel free. My email is on here. Send me an email. Happy to Zoom with you, meet over in my office, whatever it might be, and just cover any questions that might come up for you. I would love to have you in the minor. We need you. We need you. That's all I'm gonna say. We need you. Social work, right? Elders need people who are very interested in working with them through that social work lens, right? And offering up resources and support. Social work, psychology, counseling, all very, very important, especially as we're maybe nearing the end of our lives, right? And some things come up and some, extra support there on the psychological level, social level, might not be a bad idea, right? So yes, any discipline, really, any major, the gerontology minor could be a nice add-on, a nice addition, right? Looks good on a resume. Looks good on a resume.
I would actually argue that it's one of the most business savvy minors that you can have, coming out of UCCS. Some of you may have heard of the silver tsunami they're talking about. So there's a huge population, baby boomers, that age cohort is ginormous, right? Because people came back from World War II, had a bunch of babies, they had to build a bunch of nurseries to accommodate this huge increase. So now they're aging into older adult. We're having to build a bunch of nursing homes, a lot of long-term care. We literally don't have the infrastructure. That's how many people are aging into older adulthood right now. So for the next 30, 40 years, it's going to continue to happen. And people are like, oh, panicky. Like, how could we ever have seen this coming? Even though we absolutely seen this coming for a very long time.
Yeah.
So be
Only
literally
78 million babies born during that.
It's like, if only we could have foreseen. Like, yeah, we've known for an entire generation at least.
Yes.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
but it's, a lot, no matter what discipline you're in, or even if you're just like in an entry level job in like a business, like an industry or something like that. This is something that's gonna set you apart, or like at least get you in the door. In a really significant way, I think.
Yes, yes. And businesses are out there, they're very aware of the potential tapping into this very large population, right? And how they can service them and serve them and with goods and products and all those things. So literally anything, any kind of work that you go into, the Gero minor it will support you in what you want to do. It will support your employer as well. And there is some information, some research showing that it can make you more hireable. So absolutely, yeah. So we need you. They need you. Okay, I'll leave these back here and I'll hang around for a few more minutes if anybody has questions. Thank you for letting me sit in.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I know there's like a lot of psych majors, but just throwing in criminal justice here. I know, you said you worked with case management, and I think, one of you guys brought up like a friend that did psychology for criminals. So I know it was brought up like maybe you want to focus on someone, but maybe I don't want to become like a cop, maybe I want to work with criminals. But is there any way I can connect any of your paths to that, maybe like work
Absolutely.
with them?
So like I mentioned in my case management, all of those youth were juvenile justice connected. And so that's taking, if I were a CJ major, taking what I've learned in CJ, and then if I went on to get a master's in social work, combining the two skill sets to service these folks who are needing both of those things, right? So when I have this understanding of the criminal justice system, as well as how interventions work, what the theories are behind the juvenile justice system, or our justice system in general, along with here are some things that we think about as a social worker and person and environment. So how do we intervene with them? Looking at systems theories, as Marcus mentioned earlier. Thank you. And so all of it can combine. And so you can see we have in our on our faculty, their name is Dr. Stephanie Gangemi. That's been all of her work, has been in the prisons as a social worker. And so if you want to learn more about what that looks like, I would say email her. And she can give you a lot of insight. And in our practicum, so I spoke to someone today who is a mental health facility, meaning they provide mental health services, but they contract with El Paso County to go into the jails. And so I'll have a student who will be working with this social worker, a BSW student, going into the jails to work with folks. And so a lot of work may be contracted through a mental health facility that still gets you into our justice system. And then the idea of restorative justice is something that's really big now, and that folks are really looking at doing that. So that is, again, right, another way of combining the two and getting in there.
Early in my career, I did contract work for an agency, but it was a court-ordered in-home family therapy with adolescents that were involved in the juvenile justice system. And that was early in my career. And I think if I would have had a criminal justice background in my undergrad, I may have been more effective in that job. Really enjoyed it, but that's an opportunity. And we have many counseling students who are working in juvenile justice at like Spring Creek, Department of Corrections down in Kansas City. And so there's lots of opportunities if that's a population you want to work with. That would fall just generally under our traditional license for professional counselor.
And there are forensic psychology programs, but also speaking of like the certificates that you can get outside of formal degrees. So I'm certified to do NGRI and CST evaluation. So it's not guilty by reason of insanity and competent citizen trial evals. So most of the referrals that I get for that are dementia related, right? So someone has a trespassing charge against them because they have dementia and were wandering. And the only way to bring them to safety was because the police had to escort them off and they got slapped with a trespassing charge, right? But if they don't know what a judge is or what year it is, they can't, it's not ethical for them to stand trial. So they would bring someone like me in to evaluate whether they are competent to stand trial or not. So that's how it overlaps with the geropsych piece, but it's relevant for a whole lot of different populations and reasons why someone would be potentially in GRI or not competent to stand trial. So I guess it's a variation of the theme. Like if there are topics that you're interested in, there's not only one path to have that be part of your professional life. There are different doors open to you.
The delivery of service looks a little bit different, but you can still work with that population in each of our fields.
Yeah.
A plug for our human services minor. We have several criminal justice students who do the human services minor with us, and then they do their field work in corrections or with that population.
And I'll also share real quick that having a criminal justice major and then our addictions, like you can add the undergraduate certificate, which I think would be really, really informative, because sometimes that there's, you know, some overlap there.
And kind of a flip side to how service delivery is done. And so we're speaking more micro in terms of how you would interact, but you could also do some macro stuff in terms of advocacy and reform within our justice system. And looking at ways, so using some social work skills and really skills from all of us. Social work is one of our commitments ethically is to social justice and fighting social injustices. So that advocacy comes into play as well.
Yeah, good question.
Thanks, guys.
Any other questions?
Is there an easy way for you to unpack what the differences in, like you said, delivery of services might look different? Is there an easy way to kind of parse that out? I don't feel like we've hit that yet.
So, when I worked in schools, we had counselors, psychologists, and social workers all in a school, and we were an interdisciplinary team that helped students, but in very different ways. The school psychologist was responsible for assessment, individual services for students at a higher level. Counselors were kind of more that talk therapy and career development, kind of day to day and in classrooms. And our social workers worked with families and in their community and in their homes and in the school for removing barriers, providing resources, and then doing some one-on-one services as well. But we would all get together and talk about the best way the three of us work together for the benefit of the student and family. But how we talked to the student, the environment and the scenario looked a little bit different, but we had shared kind of goals and how we supported them.
And I think too, depending on the setting. So if we were talking about straight mental health counseling, it probably would all look pretty much the same across the board. But then if we looked at some other settings, and some of it varies based too on the individual social worker, counselor, therapist, however you want to term it, because it has to do what theory do they kind of subject or adhere to in terms of how they deliver services. And so we may all have been exposed to all of them, but the disciplines might lend to more. So social work, I know when I was in grad school, was very Rogerian, Carl Rogers, and very person-centered, versus some of my peers and friends were more Adlerian. And again, this is another theorist. And so some of that can change the dynamic of it as well. I've heard my LPC friends feel like social workers were more family, community, kind of like you said, and LPCs might seem to be more better suited for the individual work. Again, has to do with setting. And so that's going to dictate some of that as well. Social work, like I said, social justice systems theory, person and environment, those are the theories that we kind of fall under a whole lot. And again, but it's going to vary based on the individual who's providing the services as well.
Same for second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are questions y'all have?
I like the example you gave before about this in the school setting, kind of the differences. Do you remember? Right? You mind sharing that again?
Yeah, so I think there's a perception that we all operate in our own silos. But systemically, when we come together as three different professional fields, that creates that systemic change. And so we share a lot of skill sets, sometimes theoretic orientations. The day-to-day might look a little bit different. But I think the collaboration of our three fields is what's really beneficial to families, clients, the community. And so we're a combined force, I think, in providing the best service. So I don't want anybody to think like we kind of operate in silos. If we are looking at this through the lens of advocacy and change, we do it all together.
Yeah, so the interdisciplinary stuff is significant to serving the individual family or community, right? Because they're not living in a silo. And so they can benefit from all three of us working with them. And so that's oftentimes how it happens.
There's something has to fall in place. With a
Final questions, thoughts, feelings, exclamations, comments? Yes.
So I graduate from the psych department, next semester. Never had a mentor, anything like that. My advisor made it sound like it was very easy to get into grad school, which is finding it's not. This is my second semester. Finish next semester. You need, like a sponsor or, I know you said, it says in your bio, you're accepting, grad students. Do I need someone like you to accept me to get into the grad program?
At the master's level, the short answer is no. If you're applying to PhD programs, the short answer is that you usually apply to a specific person you want to work with. And that will be your formal research mentor and advisor the whole time. And so your acceptance is, for the PhD level is more based on, do you have experience doing research in what that person studies? So it's a totally different hiring process, basically, or interviewing process. For the master's level, no, you don't need any secret, like professional mentorship already established or things like that. So I actually was the part of the admissions committee for this year, so I can talk a little bit about that process of applying. So it is extremely competitive, especially nationally. It's extremely competitive applying for psych master's programs and PhD programs. But we only look at the application package. We don't have any outside information on that stuff, like personal relationships or things like that. The committees who review application packages only have the materials that you formally submit. If that answers that part of the question.
I want to add to that real quick, if you don't mind. So we help a lot of our students, both undergrad and graduate students here at the Career Center in applying to different programs. So one thing that we do recommend is that you do have mentors to help you with letters of reference. A lot of programs do require at least 2 to 3 letters of reference, especially if you're applying to master's or PhD programs. And so that is one way where I would highly recommend for you to drop into office hours and start connecting and building relationships with those professors that you've had, because they can really vouch for you and your success in academics to go into those programs. So we're all happy to answer questions about that for you.
And similar for us in the council, we don't, so we have a very competitive program, and because of that, we've added a 3rd cohort for our master's degree this year. So we'd only accept 48 students, now we accept 72. And that's still turning away a large number of students. And we're moving to only 1 letter of reference, because that can often be a barrier to students, especially if they've been out of school for a while. And so of the application packet, the things that really benefit students are like, how's the master's program going to align with your career goals? What do you want to accomplish or get out of it? And a level of reflective capacity, like I'm doing this because I know I want to do X. You don't necessarily need to know your population. And we do value outside work experience, internship experience, job shadow experience. Have you been working in or around people in some capacity that would basically
3 years of in-home hospice care.
Yeah.
Worked at Penrose all through COVID, on a COVID floor.
Yeah. So those are things we look at in the application back and say, these are skills that would translate well into. Also, so,
Well, and I will share that it was, yeah, that it is very competitive.
Like, okay, we're gonna get you and get 3 semesters and then we'll get you rolling on the master's program. Like, it was not an issue. Like, it just natural progression. Is what it is.
It's a process.
Sorry.
It's a license.
yes.
Would you say having research experience and wanting to apply for a master's in psychology here would make you more competitive as an applicant?
I think having research experience, yes, would, but really it's the quality of so it seems like you have a lot of really great experience, but speaking in numbers, we had 200 people apply for our master's program. We really only can accept like 8. So 8 out of 200, right? So we give a few more offers than that because we are expecting people to decline because they're going somewhere else or something. But those are the hard numbers of how competitive it is. So it actually might be helpful for you to hear those numbers. The Writing Center is another space where I would encourage all applicants to go, because when you have so many very competitive applicants, you get to the level of reading all of the, I mean, I was reading like a lot of them. And so you look at the quality of the writing of the personal statement and how well they're representing their experience, right? And so how good of a writer, you know, that's part of something too that is still within people's control, where they don't have to do like a year of work of like gaining new experience that they didn't already have that maybe someone else had. Sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's just like, am I really showing off as much as possible on my CV? Am I giving myself the most credit I can? And sometimes like people know, some people know how to do that naturally. I didn't. And then sometimes you have to learn how to advocate for yourself, you know? Like I had to learn how to puff up my chest a little bit more than I was comfortable with, just learning about what the language is and some of these packages and things like that. So I actually use that as encouragement that you probably have really great material. So maybe just looking and seeing like, did I really show off as much as possible, all of my skills and experiences?
Well, I've also heard that GPA isn't as important as I thought. It's like you get malaise. But Dr. James was like, oh, we've accepted people with C averages, things like that, which makes no sense to people.
Yeah. I don't know if I should be this, but we don't, I mean, I always am really open with students about things. You know, GPA everything's important, right? If it wasn't important to consider, we wouldn't include it because it takes a lot of time reviewing these packages, right? So if personal statements weren't helpful for us, we wouldn't have you guys write them because it takes a lot of time for us to review them. So GPA is important. That's why we ask for it. For some people, it signals how successful are they in the academic setting. I actually look through transcripts sometimes, and I totally give people a pass if they just had a really bad semester. And in their personal statement, they're like, that's when my dad died. I'm like, that totally tracks. Like, that makes total sense. And look, you got all A's the next semester. That's incredible. That actually means a lot to me, like more than if they just had an overall GPA that was slightly higher, you know? So GPA, it's like hard to say, like, does one thing mean more than anything else? No, it's all important. But what story, what is your package? Like, what story are you able to share with people that you want to work with for the next 2 years?
And we'll accept in our program students with lower GPAs, but we also have a full group interview day where we interview you in a variety of different formats and activities. And so sometimes people can demonstrate strength in that environment that they might not necessarily show on a transcript.
That's great.
My advice for you would be to find faculty that you think their research interests are really interesting and then interview them. Like get to know them as people, what their career path, you know, I mean, you just met 3 faculty who have very different backgrounds and, you know, and came up through, you know, in very different ways. Like, where do you, you know, I don't know if you shared a little bit about your career, but like, is it the psychology realm that you want to go into? Is it like, where do you see yourself?
Anything with psych, I like cog, I like the brain. I do like helping people. I kind of like to do both the science aspect and then the therapy aspect as well. Yeah, as I said, my counselor, my advisor rather, he made it sound a lot less daunting than it seems once I got into it.
I think it also depends on the program. And I think that some programs are more competitive than others. I think that some programs there should be your packet together a year together, like in advance. Others, it's, you know, having a conversation with a faculty member and seeing if it's a good fit for you. So like, for example, our student affairs and higher ed program, I will say is not as competitive as our like counseling program. So that's working in college, right? But it's still an incredible program. It doesn't have as many requirements of a group interview day and that type of thing too. So it really depends on what you want to do. The entry into that might look a little different. So like not all not all grad programs are created equal as far as that goes, but I think the Career Center is an amazing start. If you're just like, help me. And I think that like, that's just a good first stop, and they know everyone, and then they can be like, listen, let me hook you up with this person who can share more information about A, B, and C. And it's just like a really good first, there's a reason why we had it here. Like this helping professions panel in this space is because they're the hub of all the things that can kind of get you to the next stop. So you're not alone in that way.
I was just thinking about like professors that do like neuropsych. I was like, you could talk to Dr. Rachel Pham. She does clinical neuropsych. So, yeah, but I work here too, so that's why. Yeah.
Any other things before we let you go? I also have tons of pizza, so please take pizza. And then they're all sitting on top of each other, so you know it's still warm, I think.
We have
But-
about 15 minutes of mix and mingle if you want to do that, and people can approach you and ask their individual questions. Is that okay?
And I just want to commend you all for being here.
Yeah.
It means you're thinking about things in a way that are going to set you up for something a little more awesome.
And thank you to our panelists. Thank you. Taking the time.
Yeah.
And we'll be around if you have any.
For doing it again, I
Okay.
think I might know this last semester, and that's what kind of helped me decide to do this. That's awesome. I did informal interviews.